side dish with it. A side dish in the morning for breakfast. Hash browns, home fries, perhaps fresh fruit. Nay, nay. They give you beans in the morning in England. Oh, good. Let's start me off in the morning. Empty stomach, cup of black coffee and some beans. Now let's walk me around London for a little while. Get me all churned up. Put me in a taxi and see what happens. I blew the doors off a taxi. They thought it was a bombing. I heard, The driver slumped over the wheel. With the sound the gas made, he thought he had been shot. Then I heard, if he farts again, shoot on my command. What are you giving me beans for? My ass is now considered a weapon of mass destruction.
Good morning. It's Friday, Policecraft Friday, March the 15th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and policecraft. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
In the prison cell I sit, thinking, Mother dear, of you, and the bright and happy home so far away. And the tears, they fill my eyes, spite of all that I can do, though I try to cheer my comrades and be gay. Tramp, 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 the boys are marching. Cheer up, comrades, they will come. And beneath the country's flag, we shall breathe the air again of a free land in our own beloved home. Battlefront we stood when their fiercest charge they made, and they swept us off 100 men or more. But before we reached their lines, they were beaten back dismayed, and we heard the cry of victory o'er and o'er. Tramp, 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 the boys are marching. Cheer up, comrades, they will come. And beneath the country's flag, we shall breathe the air again of a free land in our own beloved home. Of the free land in our own beloved
Thank you. Now a little bit of police scanner action.
Seven young male black gang members. What is the passage route? And two by the pilot. Sir. 15. 15. Sorry, 1971. 71. I'm okay. It's going to be on 19 Paul. He's a city worker with a photocopy of a city ID. Last seen going southbound on foot. 910. Okay. Sarah, we're putting in backlog 1603 on the clock. hours from completing the work on the house.
No, we come from the station in a minute.
Then we got a call from a caller states a construction worker pushed him and shoved him because he stepped on wet cement. Now we're getting a call, assault in progress, male white, male Hispanic, arguing possibly about to fight at the construction site. 911.
Take that job with my guys.
911, I need you to take the 1A of the fire on Paulina, 4530 Paulina. Smoke coming from the roof, then we don't have to put the backlog in, okay?
Two.
2422.
Log off 2407 Adam. What's the log off?
You got it. And with his wife, now he's arguing with little kids that don't belong to him. There's a call taker and hear the male yelling in the background, thinks he may be intoxicated.
North Ridgeway. Caller wants to report squatters breaking into a vacant house.
Okay. And 2432, you out yet?
432 just got up.
Okay. 2432, I'm hoping that you have a cage. I need for you to go to the area to relieve 2472 from Dave. Reference a juvie. He's upstairs. Okay. 31, that's a disturbance over at Carmen and Washtenaw. That's Washtenaw and Carmen. Say, heavy step, male, black, white t-shirt, camouflage pants, flagging down drivers at the intersection, panhandling.
2422.
Go ahead, 22.
Can you hold the phone? Going to get gas. Unsighted Central.
Double 24.
Double.
I'm glad you're in a good mood. All right, before you hit the beach, if you can't travel just a short distance and work a disturbance over at 6018 North Winthrop, it's a group of teen males and females loitering.
And that was a little bit of police scanner action. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the patriotic shorts.
15 to 20 minutes after we arrived, my whole front erupted in fire. You can't describe what it's like. The noisiest place I've ever been. You hear that first round go overhead, and you realize that this is serious business, and there's a guy out there very much wants to kill you. The enemy quickly closed, casualties mounted, hand-to-hand fighting resulted. Training kicks in at that point. I started today with 5 officers and 106 men. We fought for 2.5 hours, hand-to-hand fighting, savage fighting. I got wounded. All the platoon leaders and myself were either killed or wounded. And 42 men were killed and 20-some wounded. There were only 48 or 49 men unwounded left defending that line. But we did.
The kids who are brand new take the point, and they're the ones that disarm the mines. One of our kids, brand new in country, discovered a mine and he went to uncovered it, and he hit the wrong button on that mine, and it blew him to bits. And I remember it. I remember the kwump of that. They all make the same sound, kwump, for some reason. And I remember looking up, and I saw this gigantic piece of green something flying through the air and landing right next to me. It was his upper torso. And he found the mine, he was disarming the mine, and he set it off. He was the only one injured in that because as he was doing that, we all cleared the area. He was brand new. Sad truth, but that's the way, it's a numbers game.
I'm proud to be a Navy SEAL, but you don't see me wearing this little trident here, like most of the people, our SEALs, many SEALs do, and righteously, so they deserved it. They earned that honor to wear the trident. But I wear only American flag because American flag encompasses everything that is good, encompasses the Navy SEAL trident as well. I want people to see me not as a Navy SEAL. I want them to see me as American. There is no hyphen in front of this American. I'm just an American. I'm proud American.
They said I had to be 20 years old. I was only 19. Had to have my mother sign. So one of the guys said, "Where's your mother?" I said, "Well, it so happens that she's in the car." He said, "All you got to do is get her to sign it. You're in." Of course, my mother wasn't in the car. She was home. And neither did about 1,000 others in my same petition. Their mother signed it as well, like me. So I signed it. I joined the 506 Parachute Infantry. Strictly an experimental unit. 7,000 people qualified for it. 7,000. They only needed 2,500. So then the picking started. They had to dwindle down to 2,500. They put us through the worst you could possibly think of. They came up with 2,500 of the finest men in the country.
Did you know in the series Band of Brothers, Lieutenant Spears is the subject of many rumors among the soldiers, such as the one that claims he killed one of his own men for being drunk. However, some of the characters in the series doubt on these rumors or say that they are blown out of proportion, but this particular one has a basis in reality. The actual incident was that he executed a sergeant who was endangering his men's lives. The Americans were under attack from the enemy, and his men had to take cover in a safe place. The sergeant did not follow the order and cursed at him, and Spears shot him without hesitation. Lieutenant Spears reported the incident to his CO and explained what he did and why he did it. The CO was killed in action the next day, and the matter was never brought up again by anyone. The Army had a high regard for Spears since D-Day. He was a brave and decisive officer, and that was exactly what they needed in those times.
Israel says that the United States is attempting to overthrow Netanyahu, with a senior official saying we expect our friends to act to overthrow the terror regime of Hamas, not the elected government of Israel. Now, as far as what triggered this claim, well, it was the CIA and the rest of the intel community's report to Congress that Netanyahu's coalition could be replaced by a more moderate one, with the intel report outlining how weak Netanyahu's government actually is and that they expect large protests demanding his resignation and a new election. And so with this, you had the Israeli officials saying that only Israelis should elect the prime minister and that they aren't a protectorate of the U.S. And notably, this comes after Biden was picked up on a hot mic after the State of the Union saying they will be having a, quote, come to Jesus meeting with Netanyahu. And that his red line that Israel must not cross is invading Rafah, which also Netanyahu rejected, saying that he's going in anyways. And so with that, you have senior U.S. officials telling Axios that if Netanyahu defies the United States, it's going to be a showdown, with Biden now considering conditioning military aid to Israel and will no longer protect Israel at the UN if they go in. And all this as the U.S. is airdropping aid and sending over 1,000 troops to construct a vast floating harbor to allow more aid into Gaza, or seemingly through their own intervention.
You're in a mall. There's an active shooter. You going to save everybody or are you going to save your family?
My family. I will not lie to you. There's no way that I can't go back into that mall. The family goes to the car, and I'm going to get them to the car. And this is why we have 2 keys. That beautiful woman is going to take my beautiful kids, and they're going to get off the X, and I'm going to go back in and put that douchebag on the ground. There's no way that I could live with myself by not going in there.
Great answer.
Family's not with me, running towards gunfire, period. Family's with me, getting off the X.
Love it.
He was a sergeant in the fabled 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red 1. His name was Gerald Andy Anderson, and he would see action in Sicily, Italy, D-Day, the Hurtgen Forest, and the Battle of the Bulge. It was at the Battle of Crucifix Hill during the Aachen campaign where Andy was wounded by mortar fire. Though near death, The thing that kept him going was a young lady named Josephine Hillman. They had met only one time prior to the war, at a Valentine's Day dance, but they struck up a correspondence. Josephine sent him a picture to lift his spirits while he was recuperating in England. I kept this picture all that time, Andy recalled years later. I carried it on my web belt, in my boot, even in my helmet liner. When he returned to Chicago, Josephine was waiting for him. She remained the love of his life till her death after 47 years of marriage. When Andy passed away in 2022, he was buried holding a picture of his Valentine.
This drone is being fired upon by a laser weapon system or LAWS, and it takes about 3 to 5 seconds to melt through the skin of the drone and cause it to disintegrate. But there is a problem. LAWS is massive, and it takes up the entire flight deck of an Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer, and there's no way of fitting it inside the destroyer without making it look like USS Pinckney. This is why the U.S. Navy chose the smaller Odin laser system over LAWS, since there's no way to fit the laser inside the destroyer hull without cannibalizing space from other systems. The Odin laser system is different from LAWS. Odin is a dazzler, a low-powered laser which blinds the electro-optical sensors inside the enemy drones and missiles, making them unable to reach their targets. Installing more powerful lasers on the destroyers would be preferred, but the Burke class is already maxed out on the power, cooling, and space, and so we won't see true laser battles until the next generation destroyers are built.
You know, I'm 5 foot 5 inches tall. When I strapped on that P-38, which had almost 400 horsepower, but total 450 caliber machine guns and a cannon in front of you, I felt like the other guys didn't have a chance. It's a funny thing in that business. You know good and well when you jump on one of the enemy airplanes, that gentleman knows you're there, and he normally calls out to his wingman or somebody, says, hey, there's a P-38 on. So you had to be very careful. You had to kind of shoot and get the hell out of there. I hit him and I rode him, and then I got out of Dodge.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the daily law for March the 15th.
March 15th. Make your work come to life. Leonardo da Vinci's hunger to get at the core of life by exploring its details drove him into elaborate research on human and animal anatomy. He wanted to be able to draw a human or a cat from the inside out. He personally dissected cadavers, sawing through bones and skulls, and he religiously attended autopsies so that he could see as closely as possible the structure of muscles and nerves. His anatomical drawings were far in advance of anything of his time for their realism and accuracy. In your own work, you must follow the Leonardo path. Most people don't have the patience to absorb their minds in the fine points and minutiae that are intrinsically part of their work. They're in a hurry to create effects and make a splash. They think in large brushstrokes. Their work inevitably reveals their lack of attention to detail. It doesn't connect deeply with the public, and it feels flimsy. You must see whatever you produce as something that has a life and presence of its own. Seeing your work as something alive, your path to mastery is to study and absorb these details in a universal fashion, to the point at which you can feel the life force and can express it effortlessly in your work. Daily law. See your work as a living thing. Your task is to bring it alive and make others feel this. Mastery, Chapter 6. Fuse the intuitive with the rational. Mastery.
And that was the Daily Law for March the 15th from the book The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
You mentioned this kind of woke movement, and some of the characteristics of it, from my perspective, seem to view things or people as either being oppressed or oppressors. So you're in one category or the other category.
Right.
Does this kind of current woke movement, which is quite different from my perspective, again, from classical liberalism, or what liberals might have been in the 1960s. Does this have its roots in Marxism?
Yeah, and other thinkers too, but Marx is one of them. I've identified Marx, Nietzsche, Sartre, and Michel Foucault as some of the major players in the formation of the woke mentality. And I think you're absolutely right. The way you put it there is the tendency to see human beings through this one lens, the lens of power. So who has it, who doesn't have it? The lens of the oppressor and the oppressed. Put it in Hegel's terms, and Marx was deeply Hegelian, the master-slave dynamic. Who's the master, who's the slave? Now, is there something to that? I would say, sure. That's one way we might look at human society. But there tends to be a reduction in the woke movement to that, And also the questioning of an objective human nature that draws us together. What I much prefer, as you say correctly, in classical liberalism is that. The appeal to our common humanity, an appeal to common moral values, and a common human nature that brings us together. And on that basis, we can move toward greater and greater justice. Now, that's the language of Martin Luther King. And I'm a great advocate of kings. What we're dealing with today is something very different. It's a different philosophical framework, and I think a much worse one.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "The only proper moral purpose of a government is to protect man's rights, which means to protect him from physical violence, to protect his right to his own life, to his own liberty, to his own property, and to the pursuit of his own happiness. Without property rights, no other rights are possible." Unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
That is how the Iranians enveloped the administration of President Ronald Reagan in 1985 to 86, in what became known as the Iran-Contra affair. America was leading an international embargo on the sale of weapons to Iran. In fighting this boycott, the Iranians saw two American weaknesses. First, Congress had cut off U.S. funding for the war of the Contras against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, a cause dear to the Reagan government. And second, the administration was deeply disturbed about the growing number of Americans held hostage in the Middle East. Playing on these desires, the Iranians were able to lure the Americans into a canny-like trap. They would work for the release of hostages and secretly fund the Contras in exchange for weapons. It seemed too good to resist, but as the Americans entered further into this web of duplicity, backroom deals, secret meetings, they could sense their room to maneuver slowly narrowing. The Iranians were able to ask for more in exchange for less. In the end, they got plenty of weapons, while the Americans got only a handful of hostages and not enough money to make a difference in Nicaragua. Worse, the Iranians openly told other diplomats about these secret dealings, closing their encirclement by ensuring that it would be revealed to the American public. For the government officials who had been involved in the affair, there was no possible escape route from the mess they had been drawn into. Feeling intense pressure from all sides as news of the deal became public, their attempts to cover it up or explain it away only made the situation worse. In luring your enemies into such a trap, always try to make them feel as if they are in control of the situation. They will advance as far as you want them to. Many of the Americans involved in Iran-Contra believed they were the ones conning the naive Iranians. Finally, do not simply work to envelop your opponent's forces or immediate emotions, but rather envelop their whole strategy, indeed their whole conceptual framework. This ultimate form of envelopment involves first studying the rigid, predictable parts of your opponent's strategy, then crafting a novel strategy of your own that goes outside their experience. Taking on the armies of Islam, Russia, Poland, Hungary, and the Teutonic Order, the Mongols did not merely defeat them, they annihilated them by inventing a new brand of mobile warfare to use against an enemy mired in centuries-old methods of fighting. This kind of strategic mismatch can lead to victory not just in any given battle, but in large-scale campaigns, the ultimate goal in any form of war. Reversal. The danger of envelopment is that unless it is completely successful, it may leave you in a vulnerable position. You have announced your plans. The enemy knows that you are trying to annihilate it, and unless you can quickly deliver your knockout punch, it will work furiously not only to defend itself, but to destroy you, where now your destruction is its only safeguard. Some armies that have failed in their envelopments have found themselves later encircled by their enemies. Use this strategy only when you have a reasonable chance of bringing it to the conclusion you desire. Here are further reflections on the annihilation strategy. From The Anatomy of the Zulu Army by Ian Knight. Legend has it that Shaka altered the nature of fighting in the region forever by inventing a heavy, broad-bladed spear designed to withstand the stresses of close-quarter combat. Perhaps he did. Certainly both Zulu sources and the accounts of white travelers and officials in the 19th century credit him with this achievement. His military innovations made an impact on Zulu folklore, if nothing else, for Shaka certainly developed fighting techniques to an unprecedented degree, and there is a wealth of stories concerning his prowess as a warrior. He may indeed have been one of the great military geniuses of his age. In place of the loose skirmishing tactics with light throwing spears, Shaka trained his warriors to advance rapidly in tight formations and engage hand-to-hand, battering the enemy with larger war shields, then skewering their foes with the new spear as they were thrown off balance. If the results are anything to judge by, Shaka's capacity for conquest must have been dramatic. By 1824, the Zulus had eclipsed all their rivals and had extended their influence over an area many times larger than their original homeland. From The Anatomy of the Zulu Army by Ian Knight. The careful use by the Zulus of cover during their advance was observed time and again by the British. Another anonymous survivor of Isandlwana noted that as the Zulus crested the Nioni Ridge and came within sight of camp, they appeared almost to grow out of the earth. From rock and bush on the heights above started scores of men, some with rifles, others with shields and assegais. Lieutenant Edward Hutton of the 60th left a rather more complete description of the Zulu army deploying for the attack at Gingindlovu. The dark masses of men in open order and under admirable discipline followed each other in quick succession, running at a steady pace through the long grass. Having moved steadily round so as exactly to face our front, the larger portion of the Zulus broke into 3 lines, in knots and groups of 5 to 10 men, and advanced toward us. They continued to advance, still at a run, until they were about 800 yards from us, when they began to open fire. In spite of the excitement of the moment, we could not but admire the perfect manner in which these Zulus skirmished. A knot of 5 or 6 would rise and dart through the long grass, dodging from side to side with heads down, rifles and shields kept low and out of sight. They would then suddenly sink into the long grass, and nothing but puffs of curling smoke would show their whereabouts. Then they advance again. The speed of this final advance was terrifying. When the British gave the order to cease firing and fall back at Isandlwana, the Zulus were pinned down some 200 or 300 yards from the British position. Lieutenant Curling of the artillery noted that in the time it took for his experienced men to limber his guns, the Zulus had rushed in so quickly that one gunner had actually been stabbed as he mounted the axletree seat. A Zulu veteran of the battle, Umoti of the Ukandampenvu, thought the final charge so swift that like a flame the whole Zulu force sprang to its feet and darted upon them. From the History of Rome, by Livy. As soon as it grew light, Hannibal sent forward the Balearics and the other light infantry. He then crossed the river in person, and as each division was brought across, he assigned it its place in the line. The Gaulish and Spanish horse he posted near the bank on the left wing in front of the Roman cavalry. The right wing was assigned to the Numidian troopers. The center consisted of a strong force of infantry, the Gauls and Spaniards in the middle, the Africans at either end of them. These nations, more than any other, inspired terror by the vastness of their stature and their frightful appearance. The Gauls were naked above the waist. The Spaniards had taken up their position wearing white tunics embroidered with purple of dazzling brilliancy. The total number of infantry in the field at Cannae was 40,000, and there were 10,000 cavalry. Hasdrubal was in command of the left wing, Maharbal of the right. Hannibal himself, with his brother Mago, commanded the center. It was a great convenience to both armies that the sun shone obliquely on them, whether it was that they purposely so placed themselves, or whether it happened by accident, since the Romans faced the north, the Carthaginians the south. The wind, called by the inhabitants the Vulturnus, was against the Romans, and blew great clouds of dust into their faces, making it impossible for them to see in front of them. When the battle at Cannae was raised, the auxiliaries ran forward, and the battle began with the light infantry. Then the Gauls and Spaniards on the left engaged the Roman cavalry on the right. The battle was not at all like a cavalry fight, for there was no room for maneuvering. The river on the one side and the infantry on the other, hemming them in, compelled them to fight face to face. Each side tried to force their way straight forward, till at last the horses were standing in a closely pressed mass, and the riders seized their opponents and tried to drag them from their horses. It had become mainly a struggle of infantry, fierce but short, and the Roman cavalry was repulsed and fled. Just as this battle of the cavalry was finished, the infantry became engaged, and as long as the Gauls and Spaniards kept their ranks unbroken, both sides were equally matched in strength and courage. At length, after long and repeated efforts, the Romans closed up their ranks, echeloned their front, and by the sheer weight of their deep column, bore down the division of the enemy which was stationed in front of Hannibal's line, and was too thin and weak to resist the pressure. Without a moment's pause, they followed up their broken and hastily retreating foe, till they took to headlong flight. Cutting their way through the mass of fugitives, who offered no resistance, they penetrated as far as the Africans who were stationed on both wings, somewhat further back than the Gauls and Spaniards, who had formed the advance center. As the latter fell back, the whole front became level, and as they continued to give ground, it became concave and crescent-shaped, the Africans at either end forming the horns. As the Romans rushed on incautiously between them, they were enfiladed by the two wings, which extended and closed round them in the rear. On this, the Romans, who had fought one battle to no purpose, left the Gauls and Spaniards, whose rear they had been slaughtering, and commenced a fresh struggle with the Africans. The contest was a very one-sided one, for not only were they hemmed in on all sides, but wearied with the previous fighting, they were meeting fresh and vigorous opponents. And lastly, from the Wiles of War, 36 military strategies from ancient China. That night, Ren Fu stationed the Song army troops by the Haoshui River, while Zhu Guan and Wu Ying made camp on a tributary of the river. They were about 5 li apart. Scouts reported that the Xia forces were inferior in number and seemed rather fearful. At this, Ren Fu lost his vigilance and grew contemptuous of the men of Xia. He did not stop his officers and men from pursuing the Xia army and capturing its abandoned provisions. Geng Fu reminded him that the men of Xia had always been deceptive and advised him to bring the troops under discipline and advance slowly in a regular formation. Scouts should also be dispatched to probe further into the surrounding areas in order to find out what tricks the enemy was up to. However, Ren Fu ignored this advice. He made arrangements with Zhu Guan to proceed by separate routes to pursue the enemy and join forces at the mouth of the Haoshui River the next day. The Xia horsemen feigned defeat, emerging now and then 4 or 5 li in front of the Song army. Ren Fu and Zhu Guan marched swiftly in a hot pursuit, eventually arriving to the north of the city of Lungan. There, the Xia soldiers suddenly vanished from sight. Ren Fu realized at last that he had been deceived and decided to pull the troops out of the mountainous region. The next day, Ren Fu led his men to move westward along the Haoshui River. They finally got out of the Liupan Mountains and proceeded toward the city of Yangmulung. At this juncture, Ren Fu got reports of enemy activity in the vicinity. He had to call the troops to a halt about 5 li from the city and array them in a defensive formation. Just then, several large wooden boxes were discovered lying by the road. The boxes were tightly sealed, and rustling sound came from within. Curiously, Ren Fu ordered the boxes to be opened. All of a sudden, dozens of pigeons fluttered out of the boxes and flew high into the sky with loud tinkling sounds coming from the small bells attached to their claws. All the Song soldiers looked up in astonishment when large hosts of Xia soldiers appeared in every direction to form a complete encirclement. On hearing the pigeon bells, Yuan Hao knew that the Song army had entered his ambush ring. Thereupon, he sent an assistant general with 50,000 men to surround and assault the band of troops led by Zhu Guan, and led the other half of his troops in person to attack Ren Fu, whom he considered a tougher opponent than Zhu Guan. The Song soldiers failed to penetrate the encirclement and were compelled to continue the tangled fight. Many were killed, and some even threw themselves down the precipice in despair. Ren Fu himself was hit by over a dozen arrows. One of his guards urged him to surrender, which seemed the only way to save his life and the remnants of his men. But Ren Fu sighed and said, "I am a general of the Song, and shall pay for this defeat with my life." With this, he brandished his mace and fought fiercely until he was mortally injured on the face by a spear. Then he took his own life by strangling himself. All of Ren Fu's subordinate officers died in combat, and his army was completely wiped out.
And that was the end of Chapter 19, Envelop the Enemy, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, get off the campaign trail. Don't be afraid to get off the campaign trail. The left wants to treat you and me and every other individual in this country as though we are politicians, as though we are campaigning for office. This is why they give you all these statistics like studies and polls and surveys. All that kind of thing is very important to politicians, but it doesn't have to mean anything to me or to you. You can stay in the campaign mode if you want, but I'd recommend that you get off the campaign trail. So when somebody's quoting you statistics, you can. Getting off the campaign trail really means saying, "I don't care." Okay? Consider that. Think about it today. Think about saying to people, "I don't care." That the next time somebody quotes you a statistic, hey, did you hear that 50% of the rich don't pay their fair share? And consider and stop and think about that. What if I said, "I don't care"? What if I said, "I don't care"? Am I going to lose votes? But wait a minute, I'm not running for office. See, change your mindset. When you change your mindset, you become less fearful. And when you become less fearful, the less fearful you become, the bolder you become, the better your life is. When you go to work, you feel much more relaxed, you feel happier, because you realize, hey, I'm not on the campaign trail. I don't have to listen to people. I don't have to engage in stupid debates about things I don't care about. I have the freedom to say, I don't care. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican because President Biden is not only the face of the country, the leader of the country, but he is the titular head of the Democrat Party. And what he does reflects on the Democrat Party and everybody in it. So right now, the Democrat Party is a party that wanders around not knowing where it's going, what it's doing, or what it's saying. It is brain-addled. And you, as a voter, deserve better. That's why you need to vote Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the next chapter in Policecraft.
13. Police culture. I come from an Irish family in Brooklyn, a few stockbrokers, a smattering of intellectuals, and 40% of the New York police force. My uncle, the cop, used to read me bedtime stories. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty fell, or was pushed, from the wall. The perpetrator has not been apprehended. 3 male Hispanics were seen leaving the area. Comedian Colin Quinn. Police culture is macho, crude, sometimes childish, and fiercely loyal, and features some of the best jargon you'll ever hear. A hard-bitten sergeant I had in Milwaukee used to look at any given horrific crime scene and muse, broken toys, a kind of catch-all grim sigh in the face of urban madness. Another cop, who was constantly getting in trouble, would enter a room and be greeted with a cheerful, "What's up, conduct unbecoming?" It's not at all unusual to hear the regular police use of obscenities in even the most unnecessary of circumstances, as in, "Hey, any of you fuckfaces want to get coffee?" Most cops also don't mince words. I once asked a coworker why a certain common gun charge wasn't on the department cheat sheet for firearm offenses. "Because," he explained patiently, "the person who drew up that list is a booger-eating moron." Another one of my coworkers, Lieutenant Sean Perdomo, a relentless detective who is my go-to guy on questions ranging from sealing search warrants to managing informants, tells me on occasion, "Standing close to me won't make you a better investigator, Plantinga." I laugh, but remain where I am, just in case he's wrong. If you're a newer cop struggling to keep up with the demands of the job, and you see an older cop sizing you up as a tailor might, you aren't imagining things. That's exactly what's going on. He's taking your rough measurements because he wants to have your uniform for free if you fail field training. This will help him continue the proud police tradition of spending his monthly departmental uniform allowance on craft beer and salted meats. New cops start buying all the extra work accessories they think they need as soon as they get their first paycheck. They'll go to the police supply store and pick up the cool monogrammed duty bag with all the pockets and straps, an oscillating flashlight, the $200 tactical boots. But all the new gear in the warehouse won't compensate for their lack of street miles and their unformed instincts. Police instincts can be taught through training and first-hand experience, or at least honed to a degree. It isn't like bat speed on the baseball diamond where either you have it or you don't. That's important because rookie cops tend to have lousy instincts. They go to a hold-up alarm at a tavern and see that the place is empty except for a man standing behind the bar. Ah, the bartender, they think, and instinctively lower their gun. Gotta be a false alarm. But how do they know that guy is the bartender? Because he's standing behind the bar? Maybe he's standing on top of the real bartender who he just shot dead during the holdup. Need to make sure first. You learn. Every station boasts that one cop you want to emulate. He's an unequivocal badass, the kind of guy who will walk through the projects, and when one of the locals shouts, "Dead man walking," he'll stop, look at the guy and say, "Was that for me or for you?" He's aggressive, unflappable, and cunning. He's got a phone full of confidential informants and knows how to cultivate the ones who have just the right amount of wrong in them. He exudes grit. He probably smokes. You want him to teach you his ways. He's the one always strolling in a little late to roll call, coffee in hand, but the lieutenant never says anything because he and his partner bring in more gun arrests than the rest of the shift combined. He boasts a sticky memory, and if someone asks him what car a certain suspect drives, he'll tell you the guy used to have that white and red Lexus with the custom rims before he sold it to Arthur Tucker. Now he drives a gray Monte Carlo with a bad exhaust and keeps it parked in front of his girlfriend's house on 22nd and Wells. He's kind in a gruff Han Solo way. He won't step foot in the command van because he's a worker, not a watcher. Out on patrol, he's got the magic eye. He sees the street the way a movie director sees, in images. He can recognize a suspect by the back of his head, spot the hand-to-hand drug sale a block and a half away, sense when a crook is about to run from him by a subtle shift in body language or demeanor, like the slightest of tremors along a fault line, the micro-observations only a natural cop picks up on. He knows that if you're outside searching for the handgun the bad guy just shot off and discarded, a good pair of night vision goggles will pick up the thermal signature of the recently fired weapon and help the cops find it. He dispenses hard truths to citizens and criminals alike. He's polite when it's called for, but also a student of human violence who knows that good manners don't always carry the day. On the Milwaukee Police Department, there were many like him. Al Morales, John Osowski, Kim Lestrilla, and Carl Zuberbier. In San Francisco, it's cops like Matt Mason, Kelvin Sanders, Carla Hurley, and Derek Liu. If you had a squadron of this caliber, you could send them into the most crime-ridden neighborhood, give it a week or two, and then confidently withdraw, all your objectives achieved. The men and women I've described just now are cops. There is a vital distinction to be made between police officer and cop. Police officers take the assignments they are dispatched to, back up their fellow officers, and make the occasional stop of a suspicious person or vehicle. They do what the job requires. Nothing less, nothing more. They are competent and steady. Every department has them, and every department needs them. But a cop digs deeper. A cop unpeels things. Ask a police officer if he's ever solved a murder, and he'll say, "Well, no, but I haven't been sent to one in a while." Ask a cop the same question, and he'll think back to the homicide with suspect unknown that occurred in his patrol sector on his off day. He'll tell you he and his partner returned to work and took it upon themselves to look at the surveillance video at major crimes. Then they hit the streets, asked around, arrested some guys, found someone who knew something, dragged his happy ass over to homicide, and gave them the lead that broke open the case. You ask a police officer who's the 6'3" cronk with the lazy eye robbing elderly women up and down Leavenworth Street, and he doesn't know, but he can quote the union regs on overtime verbatim. You ask a cop that same question, and he knows exactly who it is, where he hangs out, what his street name is. In fact, he's on his way to arrest him right now. And he can quote the union regs on overtime. Overtime is sort of important, no matter who you are. In the law enforcement world, just like any other workforce, promotions are sometimes given to the undeserving, like the supervisor who finally gets his stripes and now demands the kind of proactive policing and enduring excellence that he himself never once displayed as a line cop. He got reborn hard, is what his coworkers will say of this mystic transformation. Or the lieutenant who claims to have an open-door policy, But either he's not in his office, or he's in there all right, but the door is locked, and the blinds are drawn. Then the guy goes to a 40-hour leadership and effective executive communication course, and now takes every opportunity to bloviate, turning what should be a 10-minute roll call into a half-an-hour wind fest. He is the opposite of coffee and illustrates the principles of physics that writer Joseph Epstein liked to point out. Gas expands to fill time. Or the haughty captain with his sights set on deputy chief who asks you to go to hell and back for him on a weekly basis, but although you have worked at his station for years and have made commendable arrests and show up to work on time with a can-do attitude and a clean-pressed uniform, you are certain he does not know your name and can't be bothered to look down at your name tag to even speak it. To him, you're a piece on the chessboard. You'll still put in the work, still do all the good things you've been doing, but you're not doing it for him. You're doing it despite him, for he is a dipshit, and you hope, at some level, however deep down it may be, he knows it. Or the senior deputy, just transferred in from personnel, who asks for your stats at the end of the shift. You tell him about your arrest, the gangbanger wearing a ballistic vest who had a Tech 9 with an extended mag and 60 rocks of crack cocaine. Okay, he sighs in the tone of voice that suggests you are talking about something worthy but rather obscure, like defending the habitat of sea turtles. But did you write any parking tickets? Captain's had a lot of community complaints about illegal parking. These are the kinds of supervisors who move through life lightly, for they are unburdened by genius. The only thing they have to teach you is how important it is not to be like them. But how mad can you get at these people? It isn't their fault. They were promoted past their abilities. You learn not to expect much from them. Like houseplants. So what does a good police boss look like? You can tell him exactly what you think. He's a student of the game and puts in the effort to keep up on case law and department procedures. He strives to make your job easier, but isn't afraid to set the bar a little higher. He throws his weight around only as a last resort. He'll still be the first through the door on occasion. At a hot scene, he knows to plan for the what-ifs. What if the suspect drives right through that plate glass window? What if he jumps onto the roof of an adjacent building? What if he takes a hostage? A good boss will bring you food and hot drink at a critical incident where you've been holding the same corner for hours without relief. And he probably doesn't have a picture on his wall that says something like, "Leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality." He doesn't need crap like that to remind him what the brass should be doing. He just remembers that stuff on his own. I remember returning to work one New Year's Eve after a long layoff due to back surgery, jumping behind the wheel of the patrol wagon, ready to once again ferret out evil, and promptly backing the wagon into the front of the shift lieutenant's personal vehicle. An audible crunch was heard, followed by a very bad word that was said by me. The damage sounded worse than it looked, but I had definitely scraped the front of the lieutenant's ride. I told the lieutenant, a grave but fair man named Wayne Jensen, who had been a machine gunner in the Vietnam War and favored a pipe. He came out, looked at his vehicle, looked at me, and was silent. Then he shrugged and said, "The sun will come up tomorrow." He could have written me up for it, but he watched out for his people. He told me to get back out on the street. "But he drives," he told my partner. Sort of a get-back-on-the-horse approach. I thanked him, resumed my position behind the wheel of the wagon, and painstakingly navigated out of the narrow garage like a kid on his first day of driver's ed. Now that's a good supervisor. When cops are transferred to a new station, a thinking sergeant will introduce them to the plainclothes team because it can get confusing out there in the heat of it, and it's important to separate the good guys from the bad to avoid friendly fire. What helps is that most plainclothes cops look like cops and wear the standard plainclothes outfit of ball cap, cargo pants, and the hoodie with the home team logo. The criminals know this too, which makes it hard for plainclothes officers to sneak up on people. In fact, in some neighborhoods, if your face is free of oozing sores, everyone will suspect you're the law. So for an actual undercover operation, some plainclothes guys will don costumes, wigs, heavy overcoats. They'll push a shopping cart full of cans. It's always Halloween. There can be some mild to moderate animosity between patrol and plainclothes. The latter affect some swagger. They have their own office and aren't beholden to dispatched calls on the radio, and may turn up their nose at the humdrum of taking assignments because they've got bigger things going on. They're all about pistols and kilos. This attitude can rankle uniformed veterans because some of these plainclothes guys just got off probation a few months ago. Okay, hotshot. When you're booted off the team because you don't know anything and aren't producing and have to trudge back to patrol, I'll show you what you missed. Cops tend to be more patriotic than most. They're good about giving up their seats to the elderly on public transit. They're avid hunters and know how to fix boats. Many officers coach youth sports teams and are elders in their church. Few cops are Democrats, what with the Republicans purporting to be the law and order party and all. Lots of cops are car guys, and you'll often hear a debate about what kind of vehicle has just been featured in a crime bulletin. It's a Ford Escape, someone will say. No, someone else offers. It's a Lincoln MKX, their crossover SUV. The headlights are wider than those of an Escape, you see, and the first guy will nod. Good point. City Hall is not always held in the highest regard among the law enforcement ranks. For instance, if an officer is seriously hurt on the job, the chief of police, and probably the mayor, will visit you in the hospital. Most cops are okay with the chief coming, but the mayor, now that's another story. In fact, some cops explicitly tell their spouses or partners that if they are injured or killed on duty, they don't want the mayor at the hospital or at their funeral service. Especially if your mayor is some handshake phony with a reputation for cocaine use who can't be bothered to learn the names of his police protective detail, opting instead to call them, "Hey you." A visit from him? Nah, that slickster D-bag can wait in the lobby. The law enforcement community isn't always so keen on social programs because the last midnight basketball game, called Peace Hoops, exploded into violence and a cop's nose got busted. And don't get a police officer started on the city-sponsored needle exchange. You'll see plenty of NRA signs on police lockers along with stickers that say, "Keep working. Millions on welfare depend on you." Like most professions, law enforcement battles a culture of mediocrity. Some officers are doing just enough to get by. When the lieutenant tells you in lineup that he wants patrol to fill out field interview cards on all street contacts, you know it's a good idea, but half the time, you can't get guys to flush the toilet in the men's locker room even after they've dropped a deuce, so you're pretty sure some of those FI cards aren't getting done. Or you're just off FTO, ready to rock the criminal underworld, and you find yourself saddled with a partner with a spongy work ethic and permanently affixed with an amiably dull expression reminiscent of how Elvis Presley looked in most of his movies. A look that says, "Just filling space over here."
And that was the first half of Chapter 13, Police Culture, from Policecraft by Adam Plantinga. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.